Hey everyone, Gary Simon of Coursetro. So this feels like a strong case of deja vu because I've done this sort of crash course thing with Angular 2. There was not a version 3, so 2, 4, 5, and now 6. Now a lot of people say, oh great, another Angular version, but really the differences between 2, 4, 5, and 6 are not very extreme if we're talking about the core fundamentals of how the framework works. Now, of course, if we're talking about Angular JS or the very first version, yes, big differences. However, if you're brand new to Angular 2 plus or anything after that, then you'll definitely gain something from this 60-minute crash course that we're about to embark on. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the browser and show you exactly what we're going to build. So I'm a strong proponent, by the way, of learning by example. I mean, not just there's a fine line between theory and then showing by example. I try to mix both of them. I try to explain as much as I possibly can about what we're doing. So this is the really quick app. There's just like a sidebar here. It allows you to click between these, and as you can see, there's some nice subtle animation there. And this is pulling all the data from a free public API, okay, just for the purpose of experimenting and learning through tutorials. So you can see here, we click on this, we get specific information. So what we're going to cover by learning about all this will be installing Angular 6 with the Angular command line interface, understanding and creating components, understanding creating services, working with HTML and CSS in Angular 6, working with the Angular 6 routing, the Angular 6 HTTP client, and finally animation and how that all works. All right, so before we begin, this is really important. Make sure you click, actually, you know, that's kind of disingenuous. Click subscribe if you really like what I've done, all right? So don't just blindly subscribe. And also click like, leave a comment as well. Not enough people leave comments. Leave a damn comment and let me know what you think, maybe what you want to see. I'm definitely going to be diving into more Angular 6 specific topics after this. All right, so let's get started. All right, so the very first thing I want to mention before we begin is there is a completely 100% written version of this crash course that I'm about to take you through. And it's located here at Coursetro.com. And I'm going to put a link here in YouTube so that you can follow it. Of course, there's a lot of text here, but it's going to contain pretty much all the code. Not pretty much, all the code. It will contain every single piece of code that I go through. And that way, you know, for your own, you know, if you mess up or if you have a typo, you can just copy it and see, you know, if that was the case. All right, so to get started, we're going to first install the Angular IO or the Angular CLI or command line interface. Now, basically, that's the way that you're going to install Angular 6, and it's also going to allow you to do a bunch of other things like generate components, services. There's a bunch that it can do. So if you're more interested in you know, expanding upon your Angular CLI knowledge, then you can come here to the GitHub page. And it's going to basically give you documentation and all this good stuff. So what we need to do first is we need to install it with a package manager. Either you could use Yarn, you could use NPM, or the Node package manager. We'll just use NPM. And to check whether or not you even have the thing installed, go to your command line or your console and type in npm-v. For me, it's going to give me, I don't know, probably an outdated version of NPM. But if it goes unrecognized, then you're going to want to go to nodejs.org and go to the downloads page and then choose the download that you need for your operating system, install it with the default options, and then reload your command line or console and rerun this command up here, and it should work. So once you get to that stage, then we can go ahead and use NPM to install the Angular CLI. So NPM install -g, that means global. You only have to do this once, and then /Angular/CLI. And this, by the way, comes straight from that Angular IO website that we were just at. So I'm going to pause and let this run through. All right, and it's done. Oh, and by the way, I get a lot of people ask me, you know, what are you using for your console here? Yeah, this is on Windows, and this is called Commander, CMDER. It's a free console emulator, and I also have a video, if you search on my YouTube channel, about how and where to get my particular theme, because you can theme this thing. All right, so once you have the CLI ready to go, the way you reference or you call the CLI, the Angular CLI, is through just ng. and you type that in, it's going to give you all the commands and all this stuff to run, npm help as well. All right, so now we're going to use the Angular CLI to create an Angular 6 project. So to do that, make sure, by the way, you're in your code folder or wherever you store your projects. All right, and so we're going to run ng. We're going to issue it a new command to create a new project. The next parameter is the name of the project. So I'm just going to name this ng6. All right, now in the written tutorial, I made it -proj, but I already have that folder, so that won't work. I'm just going to call this project ng6. Obviously, it would be the name of whatever, app you're working on or whatever. And then I'm also going to optionally, see, I say optionally because right now you could hit enter and it would generate your project. You're ready to rock. There are certain flags though that you can add. So these flags I'm going to add, I'm going to set the styling as in the CSS. By default, if you don't add this part right here, it will just use straight up CSS. I want to use the power of Sass, so we're going to say style equals SCSS. And then also we're going to add the routing flag. And so the routing will be added because we want a project that has different page URLs, and adding this flag will help create a routing file for us. So we hit enter, and I'm going to just pause this while this runs through. It should take about, 30 to 45 seconds, and I'll come back. All right, so once it's finished, we can go ahead and hop into it. So the name of the project, whatever you named it. So it was ng6 for me. All right, and now if you're using something like Visual Studio Code, you can just type in code and a period and hit enter, and it will launch a new window of Visual Studio Code open within this ng6 folder or whatever you named it. Now you can also run ng and the serve command, and because we want it to open the browser after it builds out the project for us, we'll put -o flag for open. And so it's a development server, and it's located at localhost 4200, which has been standard all the way throughout version 2 of Angular. So it's popped this up off the side of my screen. Let me get this up over here and drag it where it needs to be. Where am I at? There we go. Okay, there we are. And this is what you should be presented with. All right, it's just a very simple little landing page they have created here. And don't worry, we're going to remove all this very, very shortly. All right, so just real quickly, with this, we want this development server to be running, but I also will need, or you as well if you're following along, another command line or console open up, another window for us to issue commands. So if I drag this up, you can see I can right click here in Commander, put in new console, hit start, go back to cd code /ng6. And here we are. So now I could toggle between both of these. If you're not using, Commander, obviously, if you're using something like Windows Command Line, you can run that very easily in terms of having a second option there for you. Okay, so now with our project here in your code editor of choice, I want to talk about the Angular 6 project structure. So because this is a beginner's tutorial, we're not going to take a deep dive into every file. All that's important for you to understand are the absolute basics and where you're going to be working most of the time. So when you view the folder and file structure here, it should look something, obviously similar to this. Obviously, in the future, if you ran the ng new command and you're using a new version of the CLI, things might be a little bit different here. But for the most part, if you're watching this with the next X months or whatever, it should be pretty similar. So we have a package JSON file. Generally speaking, you're not going to be working in here specifically, but this will let you know the version numbers of what version of Angular and its libraries that you're working with. So you can see this is Angular 6 indeed. All right. And we really don't need to worry about anything else in here for the most part. We can see the different commands that we can run with the Angular CLI right here. So like we can run npm start, build, test, etc. We're not going to be using much of this at all. So now the next section, or the next most important area for you to understand, is in the source folder. Let me expand this just a bit. So in the source folder, you have, for instance, styles, and notice that it is .scss for Sass. And if you didn't add that flag, this would just be a simple CSS, which is fine. But if you want the power of, Sass, then you would add this flag. This right here, this file will, you add any type of CSS rule sets that will apply to all of the HTML templating from all components. If that's a little bit confusing, don't worry, you'll understand shortly. Also, here's our index.html. We can see we have this funny selector, this custom HTML element called app root. We're going to be working in this just to import material icons and as well as a custom Google web font. And then inside of our app folder, this is where all of our components are going to reside. All right, this is where you're going to spend most of your time actually coding. This is also where we could see that we have this app routing file, and this was added because we added that routing flag. We'll work in here shortly to define some routes. And then we have, of course, our components, which will be stored in separate folders within this app folder, and also a app module file. And we'll be spending some time in here as well. So we'll take a look at this right now, because before we tackle components, it's worth looking at this file. And by the way, you may be wondering, if you're new to TypeScript, what this TS extension is. Well, basically, Angular 6 uses and has for quite a while, not just version 6, TypeScript. And in short, TypeScript provides strong type checking on JavaScript. If you're not sure what that is, just go ahead and Google it. But basically, it kind of adds to your experience of writing JavaScript. So what we'll do is in this app module file, the way this works is that generally, whenever you're using the Angular CLI to generate components and services, it's automatically going to update this file to import and add them to the ng model decorator, specifically with components. And so the components are added to this declarations array right here. And as we can see, we only have one component for the time being. And again, if you're not sure what components are, we're going to get to that very shortly. And then also, you're going to find yourself, and we will be doing this shortly, adding various imports to our import array. So when we want to add or use the HTTP client library, we're going to add it here. When we want to use animations, we'll add it here, so on and so forth. All right, so Angular 6 components. Let's take a look at that. So a component in Angular 6 provides you with the basic building blocks of your Angular app. So when we use the Angular CLI to generate our project, like I mentioned before, it created a single component. And so when you use that CLI to generate components, which we're going to do shortly, it creates 4 files. And we can see these 4 files right here for our initial component. All right, so it has this HTML file. All right, so this is where all the HTML templating goes. And this is the HTML that is or corresponds to this particular component. As you can see, they're all called app.component. All right, and then we have our Sass or CSS file, which goes there. And this is specific to this HTML right here. And then also we have a test file. We're not going to get into this simply because this is a beginner's course. So you don't have to worry about this spec file right here. And then finally, we have the actual component file, which is app.component.ts. And so basically, when it comes to components, we'll see that we have up here are our imports. By default, there's just one. It's importing component from an Angular core library. Then we have, the second section, we have the component decorator. All right, so we can see that with this squiggly brackets here, it's an object with its associated property and value pairs, and this defines the important stuff associated with this given component. So for instance, you will see that we have selector app root right there. Well, if you recall, when we looked at our index.html, we could see this app root right here. So it's simply referencing that given component, and it's saying, put this component here along with its HTML and its logic defined in app component. All right, so we'll do this shortly, and you'll see how this works even more so. It also has template URL property. This defines this file that's located right here. This is where this component's template will be located. We have style URLs, same exact thing, and there of course is more properties that you can add here depending on your purposes. So near the end of the course, we're going to add an animations property to define animations that are specific to this component, or a different component rather. All right, and then finally, the third section is right here, and this is all about the logic of your component. So right here, we can see the CLI generated a title property and bound it to a string called app, and this is where all of your properties go, and it's where dependency injection takes place, which we'll get to shortly, and it's also where you define your custom methods and functions and all of that stuff. All right, so you'll see how this works as we go on. So what we want to do now is create or generate our own component, and we're going to do several of them, and we're going to do that with the CLI. So now hopping back here, the way we generate a component with the CLI is called ng generate. Well, what is it that we want to generate? Well, in this case, it's going to be a component, and then the name of the component. So we'll say sidebar. All right, now it's going to generate those 4 files that I talked about, the HTML, the testing, we have the actual component, and then a Sass file. It also updated that app.module TS file that we looked at. All right, so if we go back real quickly and we look at that app module file, we'll see it imported this sidebar component. So they're named based on the name that you gave them. All right, from sidebar component. So we'll see there's a new folder that was added called sidebar with those 4 files. So that's pretty much standard how that all works. And then of course it was also added to the declarations array right here. After app component, we have sidebar component. So for our particular use case, we're going to add a couple more files or components rather. So a shorthand method, because in some projects you're going to need to generate a lot of these, is simply ng g for generate, c for component, and then the name. So we'll say posts, hit the up arrow key, users, up arrow key, and then finally details. All right, awesome. So now we go back and we see all 4 of our custom components. All right, so now let's say, for instance, that we want our particular app to have a sidebar with some icons. So this sidebar will always be present in the app, and the sidebar component is something that we already generated with the CLI. So let's open first our source app component HTML file. So you see all of this boilerplate code, and this is what's currently being displayed through ngserve at localhost 4200. Let's get rid of that. So I'm just going to Control A and delete all of it. We're going to add div ID equals container, and then we're going to add app-sidebar. So we see this custom HTML element, and this is based on the component selector value of our sidebar. So if we look at sidebar and come to our component file, we'll see selector is app-sidebar. So that's how we can embed a component in another component's template, such as app.component.html. All right, so we have first our div ID container, and then any HTML along with its logic will show up right here. All right, and then we'll have to the right another column. So it's simply a very simple 2-column layout. We'll have div ID equals content, and then router outlet. All right, so this is real important because this was added by the CLI when we added the routing flag, and it also generated a routing file, again, in our source app file right here. All right, so that's the only HTML that we need for app component.html file. All right, so now, like if, for instance, if we go back, we're going to see sidebar works. And that's because we've referenced that sidebar HTML in the app.component.html file. All right. Next, let's go ahead to our sidebar HTML. All right, this is where it says sidebar works. I'm going to hit Control B to get rid of this side. And now we're going to have some HTML in here. So we're going to have a nav element. an unordered list. And then our first list item is going to be a link here. So router link equals empty. So what is router link? Well, instead of using ahref, we're going to use router link to direct the user to different routes. So right now this is going to work, and we'll get that set up during the routing section. But we're just going to write the HTML for it for now. So inside of here, we're going to have some material icons. It's not going to have any text or anything. So we're going to say iClass equals material-icons and supervised. Make sure if I didn't spell that right. User circle. All right. So what I'll do is just take this from the list item element and then just paste it, because we're going to have two of them. And this next one is going to be an icon with the name of message, and then the router link is going to go to a page called posts. All right, so that's all it is for this HTML. But in order for this stuff to work, for instance, if we look at it now, we don't want that. We're going to have to import. If I bring back the menu, Control B, in the index.html, we have to import material icons. All right, so we're also going to, while we're here, we're going to add a custom Google Web font. So to do that, we're going to put it right just before the closing head tag, and I'm going to copy off screen from the written tutorial our custom Google Web font called Montserrat right here, just so you can see the whole thing. And then also we'll add material IO icons. All right, so if you want more information about how Material IO works, in the event that you ever need icons for your project and you want to have to custom design them, you can use material.io, and you could just type in what you need, like message or whatever. There it is. And then you click on it. With the selected icon, it'll give you the actual HTML to use that, just as we were. All right, so now let's go ahead and go back. We'll save this, and if we go back to our project, we'll see we have our icons now. Obviously it looks like crap, so we'll remedy that right now actually with some CSS. So what we want to do here first is we're going to open up our source styles.scss, and we're going to get pretty much all of our project CSS done right now. So I'm not going to type all of this by hand because this isn't a CSS tutorial, but just mind you that all of this is available right at that written version of the tutorial at my website at coursetetra.com. So first we have a body tag here. We're just making the background a light gray. Font family is that web font we're using. And we're using 100 viewport height for the height of the body container. And then I'm going to paste in a big bunch of stuff. Actually, not right now. I wanted to describe something real quickly. For the container, which is that container element, the ID that we created earlier, we're just going to make it a new CSS grid, which is a relatively new way to structure layouts. If you've never seen display grid before, do a search on my channel or website. I've covered the CSS grid multiple times. So if this stuff looks kind of confusing, like grid template columns, don't worry. It's just basically saying we want that first sidebar column to be 70 pixels, and then the other side will be it'll automatically fill the browser. All right. And then because we're using Sass, we're going to nest these rule sets in here. And so now I'm just going to finish it off by copying and pasting from the written tutorial all of this stuff. And don't worry, it's nothing complex is happening here that you need to worry about. We're just referencing the content ID. Some of this stuff, this HTML doesn't yet exist, but we're going to write it very shortly. But these are the rule sets for it. Nothing complex is happening here at all. All right, so we'll save that. And then we're going to finally, our last bit of CSS for this whole project will be in our sidebar CSS file or Sass file. All right, so once again from the tutorial, the written version, I'm just going to paste in some here. It's only 24 lines, very minimal. We're just referencing a nav element, unordered list element, and that's it. All right, so now if we go ahead and go back to our browser, ta-da, now it's actually starting to look pretty decent. All right. Okay, so what we want to do now is open up that routing file that we talked about, because right now if we click on this, nothing's going to happen, although something does. If we go to Control Shift in I here in Chrome, we'll have all this stuff because the routes have not been set up, so that's why these pages won't load. So let's go do that real quickly, and we'll go to our app routing.module.ts file in our source. Oops, let's see, there we go, in our source folder. Okay, so the way this works is basically we're going to import the components that we want to route. That's what happens up here first. All right, so we'll do that real quick. So import, and we'll say users component from /users. That's what the CLI generates, its own folder, and then users. You can see it's giving you a suggestion already. We want this one. All right, and then we'll just replicate this 2 times. So Shift, Alt, and down. We'll do that twice because we want 3 components in here. Details component, also our posts component, and these are all the components that we generated with the CLI. So details component, and then finally posts and post.component. So now all the red squiggly lines should have gone away. Now next, this is where within this routes array, this is where we define all of our routes right here, and they happen as an array of objects. So let's open this up, and we'll put our first route here. So each route will take a path, i.e., where exactly, like the URL of where it's going to be. This initial path will just be the path that loads when the app loads. So we're leaving it blank. You can kind of think of it like, if it was just a / root. And then we have a component property, and this tells us which component will reside at that path. Well, for us, we want to show all the users when it loads up. So we'll just copy this, users component, and there we go. So we're not done there yet. We want to have 2 more paths. So what I'll do is just copy this and then paste that twice. All right, so for this path, we're going to have details / ID. So notice we put that :ID. So this is basically a URL parameter, and we don't know what the ID is going to be, but we can refer to it by the name ID in the future, as you'll see a little bit later on. All right, so then we'll say this is the details component, and then we're just going to have another route called posts, and this will be post component. All right, very, very simple, and that's all we need to do there. Okay, so now let's talk about services. So for our users component, we want to fetch a list of users from a public API. So to do that, we're going to use the Angular CLI to generate a service for us, much in the same way that we use it to generate a component. So let's go back here. ng generate. What do we want to generate? A service. And what do we want to name it? I'll just call it data. And this time it generates just 2 files, the test file and the actual service file itself. And this time it does not create a folder. It just sticks it straight in the app folder. So data.service.ts. All right, so let's go ahead and open up our new service file and see what that looks like. All right, so the purpose of these service files makes it so that if we have any type of reusable code that we want access through by all of our components, then we can create a service out of it. All right, so when it comes to connecting to an API to try to communicate and get data from like a database of some sort, then you would do it in a service file like this. All right, so it does look very similar to a regular component. We have our imports up here. We have a injectable decorator as compared to a component decorator with its properties, and then we also have the logic of our service right here. All right, so now because we want to use this service to communicate with an API, we're going to use the Angular 6 HTTP client. So Angular comes with a built-in HTTP client. So let's import that at the top of this file right here. So we're going to import HTTP client. It's all one word. And then from Angular common HTTP. So where did I get this information? Well, if you just type in the Angular 5 or 4 or Angular 6 HTTP library, you get the official documentation. This is where it resides. All right, so after that, we can now, inside of the class, we can create an instance of this HTTP client through what's called dependency injection. So we put it here in the parameters of the constructor, private HTTP, that's the name of the instance, and it's going to be HTTP client right here. All right. Then finally, we're going to create a custom method that we will call upon in our component called getUsers. All right, so we're going to return, once a component calls this dot HTTP, and this is all right there. This is by using our instance right there, dot get. And what do we want to get? Well, we're going to use this free public API for testing website, basically, and I'll show you real quickly what this actually is. The URL is right here, so it's at jasonplaceholder.typeicode.com/users. If you just get rid of this is the website for it. It's a fake online REST API for testing and prototyping, and obviously for doing tutorials. So it tells you the different routes that we can access. So they're all right here. All right, so the first one is users, and it responds with 10 different users along with all their data that we have access to. All right, so we're going to copy that and just paste that right in there. All right, and that's all that we need to do. So we'll go ahead and save that. And before we can use this HTTP client, we have to refer back to our app module file, which we looked at earlier. So we go to our app module. All right, we can see all the components that were added here. And let's go ahead and import HTTP client module from Angular common HTTP. And once that's added as an import, we can go ahead and add it right here in the imports. So put a comma and then HTTP client module. All right, we'll save that. And now let's go ahead and import the service, because the service doesn't do anything in and of itself. It actually has to be used by a component. So we want to use it in this users component. So we'll open up the users component TS file, Control B to get rid of that. And we're going to import that service that we just created because we want to use it here in this component. So import, and this will be data service, and that's the name that's exported from it, from data service. All right, now we're also going to import observable from RxJS. Now, if you aren't sure what Rx or RxJS is and what observables are, I'm not going to cover it here, but I do have an RxJS free crash course that you can check out on my channel. But basically, it's awesome. And basically, it's going to hold the data that's returned from the API. All right. So what we're going to do now in export class users component here, we're going to add a property, because remember, the logic section of your components holds properties. It also holds, it allows you to do dependency injection that we just did before, and also define custom methods and such. So we're going to create a property specifically for holding the return data from the API. So we're going to call this users here, and this will be an object. All right, and then we gain access to our service through dependency injection. So we add it here and we create an instance of it. We'll call it data and data service. So that's what we're creating an instance of up here. All right, and then finally on ng on init. ng on init, by the way, is one of several different lifecycle hooks for Angular 6 components. So, and it's not just Angular 6, by the way. And basically, any code that's executed in here will become executed when this component loads, and that's on init. So there's a bunch of other ones, and I would just advise you to type in Angular lifecycle hooks in Google to find out more. So now, the way we access the properties and methods defined in our data service is through this .data and then we'll see it's only listening to one that we added called get users. So what we do because we're using the observables here is we subscribe to the observable and we say the data will be bound to this users not dot, but equals the return data right here. All right, so that's all we have to do. So we'll save that. Now again, still nothing's going to happen in the browser. We're going to first go to the HTML for our users component. We're going to get rid of this stuff, and notice it says user works. If we go back here, we'll see this is what's showing up here, users works. And let's get rid of that stuff. So we'll have an H1 element of users, an unordered list, all right, and a list item in. Now this is something where you're going to probably have never seen before if you've never touched Angular. We're going to put an asterisk with ng4 equals let user of users. All right, so what exactly is happening here? Well, basically this ng4 directive is what allows you to iterate over an array or an array of objects, basically. So this is the name that will refer to it through interpolation right here. All right, so I'll show you what interpolation is in a second. A router link equals when the person's name is clicked, we're going to direct it to the details page. Even if you recall, we created that path in the app routing file. And then through interpolation, which is done through these double curly brackets, we're going to reference user.id. Now the ID is coming from, oh, did I really close that out? One second. There we go. It's coming from this user's API right here where it says ID, okay? All right, so users.id, and then inside of here, in the link anchor, we'll have interpolation again of user.name. All right, so we're showing their name. And then we're going to have another unordered list inside of here with the list item of their user email that will show. And then also another list item, Alt Shift down, and we'll have an href, and this will be equal to http:// interpolation user.website, and then user.website right here. Let's get rid of this extra character there, and there we go. All right, so if we save this, with any luck, if you set everything up all correctly, it's going to show all those results, and it's going to look nice because we already did the CSS. And there we go. Awesome, awesome stuff. So this is in correspondence to all this data right here. So we'll see Clementina. There we go, down there. Now, of course, if this is clicked, it only says details works, and it doesn't actually show the user information because we haven't got to that part just yet. So let's go ahead and work on fetching more data from this API here. So Control B, and we're going to go back to our data service file. It's up there. All right, and we'll go ahead and create a couple more here. So we're going to copy this get users method and just paste it twice. So when we want a single user, we'll just say get user singular. and we're going to pass in their ID right there. So the ID will be user ID, we'll call it. And then here at the end, this is going to be user.id. All right, so that gives us access just to a single user. All right, and then also just for muscle memory, we're going to do get posts, and we'll work with the posts portion of the API. All right, so save that. And now we're going to go ahead to the details component. All right, so we'll come up here to our details component. All right, so the same thing here. We want to import that data service and the observable. I don't feel like typing all that out again, so we'll just come up here in the users component, copy that, paste it right here. And this time we're also going to have something new, and that will be called activated route. So import activated route from Angular /router. All right, and you'll see how and what this is and how it works in a second. All right, so now what we'll do is down here, define a property for user, and it's going to be of a type object. And then for our constructor, we're going to pass in our data service. And then we're also going to create an instance of that activated route. So private route, activated route. Just like that. All right, so inside of the constructor, we're going to reference that route instance here. And we need to get the parameter of the ID that's in the URL. So it's /users / the actual ID, which is a number. All right, so what we're saying here is this.route.params, and we're going to subscribe to them, and we'll say params this.user is equal to the parameters, and we named it ID in that the routing file, if you recall. So let me just bring that up real quick. App routing, we named it ID. All right, so that's what that is in reference to right here. So that's how you get the parameters that are in the URL. All right, so then on init, so when this component loads or when somebody clicks on a name from the users component, when this loads, we'll say this.data.getUser, and we pass in that ID that we just defined. So this.user, and we'll say .subscribe, and then we'll pass the data, and we'll bind the data of this.user is equal to data right there. Okay, so next what we'll do is head on over to this details component file, and then we'll say h1. I hate when it does that. There we go. We'll put in through interpolation, user, that name property, and then just a quick unordered list. And then we'll have a strong element for the username. And then we'll put through interpolation user.username. That's one of the properties the API provides. And two more times, we'll put email and then also phone. Then email and phone. Now, with any luck, if we save this and your other files are saved and such, we go back here and click on this, and there we go. We have all the data that's associated with each user. Awesome, awesome stuff. All right, so for more muscle memory, let's repeat this process for posts. So this also contains an endpoint for posts. Let's see, where is it? Right here. And it'll return 100 items. All right, so maybe pause it if you want to challenge yourself. and you know, try to do it yourself, but it's repeating the same process if you wanted to make it so that when a user clicks on this little post or this message icon, it'll show all the posts from that endpoint. But I'll go ahead and do that anyhow. So again, the process is we define the method in our service. Wait, didn't I already do that? Oh, and that's a spec file, by the way. Yeah, so it's get posts. That's what we refer to it as. So it's / posts right here in the endpoint. And then we're going to go over, first we'll go to our details component. We're going to grab some stuff that we're going to need. So for our posts, we don't need the route, this activated route here, because it's just / posts. So let's go up here, right there. Import that. Also import private data service right there. And then also we have our posts. And then we'll say it's an object here. And we'll say within ng on init, we have this .data.get posts. And we subscribe to it. We pass the data to this .posts. All right, so we'll save, go to the post component HTML. We'll have h1 of posts, and then an unordered list. We're going to iterate through it through ng4, let post of posts. And then inside of here, a router link. It's not going to go anywhere. I haven't set up a route for this, but I did it anyhow. Post.title. And then finally, our last line will be post.body. Save it, go back to our result, and there we are. Users, posts, all that good stuff. Awesome. All right, so it would be cool, for instance, to make it so that we highlight in some manner which page they're on. So this is where class binding comes into play. There's also style binding, but we're gonna cover class binding. And so what it will allow us to do is to, based on a template expression, it'll allow us to determine which route we're currently on, and if so, it will add a class to these list items right here. And that will allow us to style it in such a way that it's blue, and it will let the user know where they're at currently. All right, so to do that, let's go ahead to our sidebar component file. All right, and we need access or a way to know which route we're on, or which path or page. So we're going to import the router and another function called navigation end, and we're going to import it from the Angular router. All right, so now we're going to create an instance of the router. All right, and then inside of here, we're going to say router.events. We're going to subscribe to it. So every time the router's changed or a new path has been, somebody clicks on a new router link, we're going to say navigation end and we'll say this.current URL equals _URL, and this could be named anything you want it to be. It's just a real quick, easy way. This right here hasn't been defined yet. That's why there's a red squiggly line, and this is simply a string, current URL of type string. All right, and so this will contain the path that the user is currently on, this current URL right here. And the way we use this is in the template. So if we go to our template file for sidebar component HTML, and if we come right here after this router link, we can add that class binding right here. So we wrap it in brackets, and we'll say class dot and then the name of our class. And this has already been defined when I pasted that in the styles.scss. So we have a class called activated, And it's only going to add this if whatever's inside of this, what's called a template expression, validates to true. So if current URL, which is the property that we just defined in the components logic, is equal to that right there, just the /, and then we'll copy this and do the same thing right here. All right, so this is going to be /posts. All right, so now if we save this and make sure your component file is saved as well, you can see it's now in blue. Awesome, awesome stuff. All right, so the final thing that we're going to take a look at is just animations. All right, so let's say, for instance, when this page loads here, this user's page loads, we want to have these animate in. All right, so Angular 6 comes with, it doesn't come with it, you have to install it, but Angular has its own animation library, and it is quite powerful. And it can be quite confusing to understand at first, so just bear that in mind with me. But let's go ahead and install it. That's our very first step, and we're going to do that through the console. So we'll type in npm, not bon, npm, and install Angular animations latest, and we're going to save it as a dependency, and I'll go ahead and pause. All right, didn't take very long, maybe about 8 seconds or so, or wait, no, 5 seconds. And then we'll come down here, go back to our code editor. All right, and we have to go to our app module file in order for our app to be even able to access it. So we import it here. All right, so I'm just going to copy this from the written tutorial real quick, or the import statement. All right, so the import statement here, it is in full. So we're importing browser animations module from Angular platform browser /animations. And then we have to add it as import as well. So we copy this, put a comma there, and then there we go. All right, now in order for us to use it in one of our components, we have to import the various animation functions from the animations library. So we want to use it in our users component. No, not details. What am I doing? There we go. Down here in users. So I'm going to hit Control B, and we're going to add a bunch of imports from the animation functions. All right, so we're going to import trigger, style, transition, animate, keyframes, query, stagger. A lot of these are required, but some of them are extra just depending on your purposes. And so this is all imported from the Angular animations path right there. All right, so now in our component decorator, we're going to add an animations property, and it's an array. So animations, and then we open it up in brackets. All right, so each animation that you define starts off by using the trigger right here. And the trigger accepts a name. So trigger. What is the name of this animation? Well, whatever we want to happen. So list stagger, we'll call it. And by the way, I did get this code from a different tutorial that shows you how to do stagger animations, which is what we're about to do. We'll put a comma here. And so this accepts, in this second section or parameter right here, a bunch of other code that you'll see. So everything's going to be contained within this trigger, and you can have multiple triggers if you have multiple animation types for a same component. So then we're going to define transition. All right, again, this is one of those functions that's imported at the top here. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because, if you want more information on how all this actually works, then you can type in, Angular transition function, and you'll get the official documentation. All right, so this accepts in the first parameter, we're going to put a wildcard, and we'll have the left stand sign equal to or greater than sign, and then another asterisk. So what exactly is that? All right, so basically we're saying that anything here that's going to be defined in the second argument over here, will take place when any type of transition occurs from any state going back and forth to any state. So to expand on this more, if you go to Angular IO Guide to Animations, it's going to provide you with a really comprehensive overview. And we can see transitioning is one of the first things that's covered here. And we can see, for instance, transition inactive to active is one of the names that you can use. And these are referred to as states. And you'll see if we do a search for wildcard, that's what we're using. And it'll provide a more a better understanding to this than I could. All right, so inside of here, we're going to put in a bracket, and we'll say query. This is another one of those functions that's returned. We're going to say on enter. So it's saying basically when something enters, like our new component, then what happens inside of here. All right, well, let's get this. There we go. Well, what will happen inside of here is we're going to have a style. We're going to define a style, and we'll say opacity 0, and a transform. And we're going to transform, and we're going to move things over up on the y-axis by -15. So they're going to fall from the top in. All right, and then we're going to put a comma here. And we're going to stagger them because this is going to be added to a list of items, or users rather. So we'll have the first argument that accepts is the duration in milliseconds. So 50 milliseconds, they'll fall in. So it'll be quite quick. And then we'll also accept animate. And that's another one of those functions that's added. So we'll have animate. And this will be 550 milliseconds ease out. So you can add, you can control the easing. And then finally styling, we're going to make it go from the opacity 0 to 1, and then transform, translate Y, 0 pixels, and there we go. So with any luck, I was able to get all of this without, any errors. So hopefully you did too. All of this code here, by the way, is on the written version. Now, just at the end right here, we're going to add a comma, brackets, optional, true, we want to add. We'll see if I actually, well, it looks like I didn't add that in the right spot. I think this has to be real quickly moved up into there. Yeah, it needs to be added right here, not down there. Sorry about that. All right, and so if you're confused as to what that is, if you don't have that added, you'll get an error. And so next, we're going to go to query. We're going to have a second query, essentially, for leave. So this only defines to elements that are being added, and you're defining their styles as they're added, and where they're going from and to. So let's do a leave animation real quickly. So we'll take this query, and this ends right here, and we'll put in a comma right after it, and then paste it. And this is going to be on leave. All right, so from leave, this actually is more greatly simplified. So I'm actually going to take everything within this query right here and paste this following. So on leave, we have an animate function with 50 milliseconds, and style, it'll simply fade out to opacity 0 from 1 by default up here when it's left. All right, and so now we'll go ahead and save this, and we'll go back to our users component. And in order to access this, we have to add on, we'll add it on the UL element, brackets, at, and then the name of the trigger. So list stagger, and we stagger it on our users property. And we save this, and now if we refresh this, we can see they all kind of just fade in from that 15 pixels up, and also from 0 opacity to 1, just like that. It's very subtle, And of course, you can make it more dramatic if you want to, but that's in the gist how animations work. Stagger animations, maybe that wasn't the greatest topic for a beginner, but you can definitely check out the documentation that I showed you at the official website to gain a more thorough understanding of how animations work. Now, a lot of times you can get away with using just CSS animations, but the Angular specific animations really provide you with a lot more power. All right, so finally, now that our app is basically done, a very simple app. Let's say, for instance, you want to be able to upload this for others to see. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Depends on what you're using. We'll just assume a standard host. We would go to our command line interface and we would type in ng build. Now, I'm going to run two commands actually, but the ng build command will take everything and it's going to create a dist folder, dist for distribution. And as you can see, it's added it, and if I bring up real quickly the folder here, the ng6 dist folder, it has the name of it, ng6 folder, it places inside of the dist folder, and then we have all of our stuff, all of the stuff that we would upload right here, but it's quite large. Like the vendors, that's 3.5 megs for simple app. That's crazy, right? So we would add for production ng build -prod. Now, when we do this, it's going to add this prod flag will greatly reduce the size of it. And if you have any issues in your code, it will be quick to point them out right here, like in the details component HTML file. It's saying property name, username, email, phone doesn't exist on type object. To fix that, we simply go to our details component HTML and we'll wrap this in a div and we'll say if the user object exists, then we can do all this stuff and actually show it. So that's one of those things that you'll have to research when you come into errors like that to figure out how to fix. Now, if we rerun the command, hit enter, wait for it, we'll now see that it worked. And if we go back and we look at the file sizes, now it's just 339 KB total, which is awesome. So now that is it. All right, so hopefully you really learned a lot about the core fundamentals that are behind Angular 6. So make sure if you're watching this sometime in the future, maybe a couple weeks down the road after it was released, that you check out my channel as well as the website for more Angular 6 specific topics and tutorials, as I'm definitely going to be getting into more of the intermediate and by example type of tutorials. All right, so like I mentioned before, if you like that, make sure you hit subscribe right underneath here, and then also leave a comment, hit like, and I'll see you guys real soon. Bye.